everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Bree. I hope y'all are doing well today. So today's case, we're going to be talking about Addie Hall and Zack Bowen. This case takes place in New Orleans, Louisiana, and it takes place in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. This case is a crazy one, so get ready. Addie Hall was born January 15, 1976 in North Carolina. She was a very talented independent artist and she was a very good poet and dancer. She was a very creative, free spirit and she was very feisty. She grew up in North Carolina, but after leaving a toxic, abusive relationship, she wanted something more in life. So she decided to move to New Orleans, Louisiana. When she arrived in New Orleans, she found a job as a bartender, and she actually worked at a bar in the French Quarter called the Spotted Cat, which is a jazz club. If you don't know, the French Quarter is a neighborhood in New Orleans where the famous Bourbon Street is located. Because she just got out of an abusive relationship in North Carolina, she was very hesitant when it came to dating again, and she just wasn't interested in looking for someone. Addie also had her struggles with her mental health. She had a very troubled childhood. She suffered sexual abuse when she was a child, and she ended up being diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And she would sometimes forget to take her prescribed medication, which would cause her to have erratic, angry outbursts at random times. And there really was no telling when these outbursts would happen. However, something that was consistent with Addie is that she would get very aggressive and angry when she would drink alcohol or do any drugs. Her friends did say that the drugs and the drinking did turn her into a different person. But despite what Addie was trying to work on and trying to fix within herself, she was living in a city that she really loved. She was living a very bohemian, free-spirited lifestyle. She loved to ride her bike around the French Quarter, and she just absolutely loved New Orleans. In 2006, New Orleans had a population of 208,000 people. Nicknamed the Big Easy or NOLA, New Orleans is known for jazz music, Creole food, beignets, Mardi Gras, and the New Orleans Saints football. Now let's talk about Zack Bowen for a moment. Zack Bowen was born May 15, 1978. He grew up in Bakersfield, California. He was very laid back and he was very charismatic and charming, and he left a lasting impression on everyone he met. People that knew Zack said that from a very young age, he was a people pleaser. He was constantly worried about letting people down, and he never wanted to disappoint anyone, and he was very hard on himself whenever he would fail at something. As we all know, failing is a part of life. No one ever wants to fail and no one ever likes it. However, it happens and it's part of you live and you learn. But Zack was very, very hard on himself, more than the average person about these failures. He went to high school in Sacramento, California, and during this time, Zack fell into a deep depression, and he wanted to try and fix how he felt, so he decided he was going to leave his high school in Sacramento, and he was going to move out of his mom's house and move to New Orleans, Louisiana to live with his dad. His parents were separated and living in different states, so he was going to start high school in New Orleans and basically start a new life. When Zack was 18 years old, he graduated from high school and he got a bartending job on Bourbon Street. While he was working, he met a woman that was 10 years older than him named Lana Shupak. Lana and Zack immediately started dating, and soon after their relationship started, Lana found out that she was pregnant. Even though Zack was young when he became a father, he really embraced being a dad. Zack and Lana ended up getting married and having 2 kids, a boy and a girl. So Zack then went on to join the army so he could get good benefits to provide for his family. While he was in the military, he served 2 tours, one in Kosovo and the other in Iraq. One incident in particular that haunted Zack the rest of his life was when he was overseas on tour. He befriended a young boy that lived there. He was teaching him some words in English and playing games with the boy, and then a couple days later, he found out that the young boy was murdered because it was not allowed for him to have been friends with an American soldier. This incident caused Zack to have severe survivor's guilt. After several years of serving, Zack was generally discharged. Now, generally discharged is not the same as honorably discharged. Generally discharged is when someone's service was satisfactory, however, they were involved in situations where their performance isn't enough to be honorably discharged. Now, Zack being a people pleaser, the general discharge title that he got felt very disappointing to him. He felt like the trauma he endured and all the experiences he had were all for nothing. However, his discharge meant he got to go home. So he packed his bags and he moved back to New Orleans with Lana and their children. When Zack got back to New Orleans, his relationship with Lana completely fell apart. Lana said that when Zack returned from the army, he was a completely different person. They eventually ended up getting a divorce. It's not uncommon in situations where people go serve in the military for several years and they go back home and they're not the same person they were when they left. However, Lana decided that this wasn't going to work for them and their marriage, so they decided it was best to get a divorce. Zack ended up going back to bartending again, and he ended up getting a job at a bar called the Spotted Cat, and this is where he met Addie. Addie and Zack met. Like I mentioned earlier, Addie was not really interested in a relationship, but she really liked Zack. He was exciting to her. Whenever they would talk, Addie would try to stay distant because she had her walls up, but that didn't stop her from flirting and teasing him. From the very beginning, Addie wasn't sure if she could trust Zack. She wasn't sure of his true intentions, and in her mind, she thought he could be talking to a lot of other girls because he does work at a bar on Bourbon Street. But Zack was very interested in Addie from the moment he met her, and he wasn't interested in anyone else. Zack and Addie really vibed well. They both had very similar lifestyles and shared a lot of the same interests. They both loved to party, and they also bonded over drugs. After dating for a couple of weeks, in August 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit, and instead of evacuating out of New Orleans during a Category 5 hurricane, they decided that they were going to stay in Addie's apartment and hunker down together. While Addie and Zack were riding out the storm, they became extremely close. During the storm and the aftermath of Katrina, they became inseparable. They really got to know each other, and they bonded over this time period. After the hurricane, they were photographed for the national magazines and newspapers, and they were even in a New York Times article where they were interviewed on their decision to stay in New Orleans instead of evacuating. Hurricane Katrina really brought Zack and Addie together, but they weren't living a normal everyday life. They didn't have a lot of responsibilities. They didn't have to go to work or worry about paying bills. Everything was shut down and destroyed. They spent so much time together, and they were still in the honeymoon phase of their relationship. Right after the storm, they found some other people that also decided to stay during the storm, and they kind of formed a little community. They would make dinners, and they would sing songs around the campfire. There was drinking, and there was dancing. It was basically a never-ending party. They didn't have electricity or water. They just really loved this apocalyptic world they were living in. They would go to abandoned bars and steal the alcohol, and they would make cocktails for their neighbors and random people passing by. And they would use the cocktails as a way to trade for different things that they needed. Whenever New Orleans started to open back up and things started going back to normal, that's when reality started to hit Zack and Addie in ways they weren't expecting. They had a really hard time with normal life. They wanted it to stay the way it was during the storm, just them against the world. Addie had a lot of difficulty sharing Zack. She wanted it to just be him and her. After the storm, Zack got in contact with his ex-wife, wanting to see his kids, and Addie didn't like that at all. She didn't want his ex-wife in the picture or even his children. She didn't want any part of the life he had before her. She just wanted him and nothing else, and obviously that wasn't going to happen because he had kids and he had a past. but Addie didn't want the responsibilities of that, and she just wasn't interested in that type of life. Whenever the kids would come to visit Zack, Addie would be so cold to them. Instead of trying to be a good stepmom, she would leave and go party instead of hanging out and getting to know the kids. So, of course, that and a multitude of other things really damaged their relationship. Addie and Zack would get into a lot of arguments and would fight nonstop. Their arguments weren't the normal couples butting heads type of arguments. They were very violent fights. Their fights would sometimes happen when they were sober and a lot of times when they were using drugs and alcohol. Addie and Zack's relationship was extremely toxic. They would have explosive fights and they would break up, but then they would always get back together. It was a never-ending cycle for them. Zack started getting sick of the emotional roller coaster and the uncertainty of their relationship, and so he told his friends that he wanted it to end and he was planning on breaking up with Addie. And he ended up telling Addie this. He told her he didn't want to be in a relationship anymore, and Addie's response that the two of them should start fresh and they should get an apartment together and just start over and try to move past this. And so Zack agreed. So they went apartment hunting around the French Quarter in New Orleans, and they ended up coming across an apartment located at 826 North Rampart. And the moment Zack and Addie saw the apartment, they knew it was the one, and they signed the lease and moved in right away. When they signed the lease, it was in both their names, and Zack actually paid 2 months' rent up front so they wouldn't have to worry about it. Just a couple of days after they moved into their new apartment, Addie decided to break up with Zack again. And she said the reason was she discovered Zack was cheating on her, and to her, that was it. She was done. To her, there was no coming back from that sort of betrayal. She came from a toxic and abusive relationship before Zack, so cheating to her was the last straw. She didn't want to talk about it and she didn't want to work it out. She was just done. So on October 4th, 2006, Addie ended up going to her landlord and asked if they could change the lease and only have her name on it, and to take Zack's name off. And the landlord said, okay, he allowed it. But he told her to go back home to Zack and try to work out their relationship. This would be the last time anyone seen Addie alive. So Addie ended up going home and telling Zack to get out. And this is when Zack found out she took him off the lease, which made him furious. Remember, he is the one who paid 2 months' rent up front. So of course, this caused an extreme fight that went on into the early hours of the morning. Then around 1 a.m. that morning on October 5th, 2006, during the argument, Zack tragically strangled Addie to death. Not long after Zack strangled Addie, he committed necrophilia. That means he had sex with Addie's corpse. And then after he had sex with Addie's body several times, he laid down next to her and fell asleep. Then the next morning, whenever he woke up, he went on with his day as if nothing happened, which is insane. Like, he just snapped. But you don't just wake up one day and decide to commit necrophilia. So, like I said, he woke up the next morning and went about his day like nothing happened. So he ended up going to work. When it came to Zack's behavior on October 6, 2006, he went to work like he always did. But his coworkers said that he was acting very weird. They said that he was very quiet and he wore his sunglasses inside the whole day, and he was wearing a hat that he normally didn't wear. People just figured he was just depressed over Addie. So after work, Zack went back to the apartment he shared with Addie, and he started cleaning up and getting rid of evidence. Over the next several days, he disposed of Addie's body. He cut up her body in the bathtub with a hacksaw and a knife, and after separating all of the body parts, he decided that he needed to remove the flesh from the bones. So he thought the best way to do this was to cook the body parts. So he cut off all of Addie's hair and then he placed her head in a pot on the front of the stove. He then placed Addie's hands and feet into another pot and he put the pot on the back of the stove. He then put her arms and her legs in a roasting dish and put them in the oven. He then placed her torso in a black garbage bag and then put it in the fridge so he could deal with it later. Whenever friends would ask Zack where's Addie, he would tell them that Addie left him and told them that the two of them got into a really big fight and she decided to move back home to North Carolina. A lot of the friends just didn't believe Addie would leave New Orleans. They knew how much she loved the life she had in New Orleans. It was just strange to them. But then some of the other people that they knew said that she was very unpredictable. Whenever she put her mind to something, no matter what it was, she was going to get it done. So a lot of people believed if she really was done with Zack and wanted to go back home to North Carolina, then she would have, no questions asked. Also, Addie did have a history of running away. She ran away from North Carolina, so who's to say she wasn't going to run away from New Orleans? The days after Zack killing Addie, he went crazy with the partying. He spent thousands of dollars at strip clubs and on drugs and alcohol and sleeping with prostitutes, and people just figured he was just trying to get over his breakup. On October 17, 2006, so around 2 weeks after the murder of Addie, Zack went to the Omni Royal Hotel and he drank at the rooftop bar until he became blackout drunk. After he felt he was ready, he went to the 7th floor of the hotel and he jumped off the building, ending his own life. When the police arrived at the hotel, they saw Zack's body. They looked in his pockets, trying to figure out who this person is, and whenever they looked in his back pocket, they found a note in his army dog tags that he had in a plastic bag, and they also found the keys to Zack and Addie's apartment in the front pocket of his pants. The discovery of Zack's body is what really changes everything. So the note the police found in Zack's back pocket was addressed to the police. When they opened and read it, it said, and I quote, "This is not accidental. I had to take my own life to pay for the one I took. If you send a patrol car to 826 North Rampart, you will find the dismembered corpse of my girlfriend Addie in the oven and on the stove and in the fridge, along with the full signed confession from myself, signed Zack Bowen." End quote. After the police read the note, they rushed to Zack and Addie's apartment. Whenever they arrived, they immediately walked in and they were in complete shock of what they were seeing. The first thing the police noticed was how cold the apartment was. Zack had the AC turned down low to preserve Addie's body as much as possible. On the walls of the apartment, Zack spray painted words, "I'm a total failure," and "Please help me stop the pain." He also wrote to his ex-wife Juana and her name and her contact information so they could let her know he took his life. Whenever the police got to the kitchen, they seen writing above the stove with an arrow pointing to the oven that said, "I love her, look in the oven," and on the oven door it said, "Don't open." They found Addie's remains on the stove and in the oven. The police's first thought was, this is cannibalism, and I can understand why. I mean, why else would you have body parts cooking? But when they did an autopsy on Zack, they confirmed he did not consume any of Addie's body parts. During the home search, they ended up finding a journal that Zack had been writing in, and police realized this is his confession. And it said, and I quote, "Today is the 16th of October at 2 a.m. I killed her at 1 a.m. on Thursday, October 5th. I very calmly strangled her. It was very quick. Halfway through the task, I stopped and I thought about what I was doing. The decision to halt the first idea and move to plan B, which is the crime scene you are now in, came after a while. I scared myself, not by the action of calmly strangling the woman I've loved for 1.5 years and then desecrating her body, but by my entire lack of remorse. I've known for forever how horrible of a person I am. Ask anyone. And I decided to quit my jobs and spend the $1,500 cash I had being happy until I killed myself. So that's what I did. Good food, good drugs, good strippers, good friends, and any loose ends I've had. I didn't contact any of my family, so that'll explain the shock. And I had a fantastic time living out my days. It's just about time now, end quote. The police had to have been in complete shock. Not only are they in a horrific crime scene, but they have the whole confession written out. When they did the autopsy on Zack, the medical examiner noticed that there were marks on Zack's body that didn't come from the fall. And it was found that these marks were 28 cigarette burn marks. And Zack was 28 years old at the time. It's believed that Zack self-inflicted these burns on himself to indicate the 28 years he felt and perceived himself as a failure. Now, I do want to mention that the apartment Addie and Zach moved into happens to be located right above the Priestess Miriam Voodoo Spiritual Temple, which is a well-respected cultural establishment in New Orleans. However, many people have connected this murder to have something to do with the location of the apartment, meaning maybe there is some type of connection to the murder and the Voodoo Temple. The apartment is actually a tourist attraction now, and there have been reports of paranormal activity in the apartment since the case. In February 2016, an electrical fire destroyed some of the building. It still stands, and spirit hunters visit it, hoping to connect with those who have passed, desperate to ask one last question: why? You could visit it when you go on a tour of the ghost tours of New Orleans. A lot of people say they have felt like they were being watched or they heard voices. You can actually go inside and see where this horrific crime took place. It is now a museum, and they still have a lot of the original pieces from the murder in the apartment, including the oven and the refrigerator where he stored Addie's body. So this is the case of Addie Hall and Zack Bowen. It's very sad that Addie will never have real justice and Zack will never have to face punishment for what he did to Addie, but at least he's no longer walking free on this earth. That's all I have for y'all today. I really appreciate y'all taking the time to watch my video. It means so much. So until next time, please remember the world is a better place with you in it.